Great, thanks, Jean. And thanks everyone for being here. As Jean said, my name is Zach Weingarten. I'm a senior researcher at American Institutes for Research, and we're supporting DESE with this project, which focuses on Indicator 7 data collection and supporting districts with that process. So we're very happy to be here today. We're looking forward to sharing this information with you about Indicator 7 and the data collection process. We're going to get started shortly. I'm going to let Talitha introduce herself now.
Thank you, Zach and Jean, and good morning, almost afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Talitha Darrington, and I'm a senior researcher at AIR like Zach. I've been working in early intervention and preschool special education coming up on 30 years. So I started when I was 2 years old, when I graduated from early intervention, right? I appreciate your attendance today, and I'll turn it back to Zach to get us going.
Great. Thanks, Talitha. So there is a question and answer pod, which I'm sure you all can see. And we encourage you to use that throughout the session to ask questions. This is a Zoom webinar, so it's different than a regular Zoom meeting where you're able to unmute yourself and ask questions live. So we do ask that you use that Q&A function to communicate with us and ask questions throughout the session today. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Okay, welcome everyone. This is our introduction to Indicator 7. So we're doing an Indicator 7 overview and introduction to the ECOS database. And the ECOS database is the new system that we're excited to share with you today that we just began using for the first time this year. So we appreciate everyone's hard work with using a new system this year. We know there was a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainties about using the new system, but we really appreciate all the hard work that you all did to make this year a smooth start to using the ECOS database. So we really, really do appreciate all of your efforts with that. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with a brief overview of Indicator 7. So this is going to be a very brief section where we talk about what Indicator 7 is and why it's important to collect this information. I'm sure this will be a review for most of you. And then we're going to get into the main content for today, which is this new database that we're sharing. So the Early Childhood Outcomes Summary Database, or ECOS database is what we're calling it. And Talitha is going to kind of go through step by step about how to access the database, how to enter information in it, and some common data entry errors that you might experience. And then the third section of our webinar will really look at the Indicator 7 timeline and process. So what we should be thinking about in terms of when to enter this data and what kind of processes we can establish to make it run as smoothly as possible. Then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. And although we blocked off an hour and a half for this webinar, I don't anticipate it taking that full amount of time. So we certainly don't have an hour and a half worth of content to present to you, but we did want to leave a good amount of time for questions and answers. I believe we'll have around 45 to 50 minutes of presentation and then plenty of time for question and answer. All right, so I will move us along and get us started then. So starting out with a brief overview of Indicator 7. So as you all know, we collect Indicator 7 early childhood outcomes data, partly because it's a requirement from the Federal Office of Special Education Programs. So the Federal Department of Education requires that report on 3 child outcomes annually. So as part of Massachusetts' responsibility to the federal government, we have to report on how children with disabilities are performing in programs and what kind of progress we're seeing among those children. So the goal is really to focus on results. So we want to know, are we moving the needle for these kids? So we're trying to focus on moving beyond compliance to an emphasis on results. And so that's the big picture. So that's why we report this data each year. But it's also important to think about how the child outcome data can also help you as a district to understand the impact that you're making on students, and to also use that information to guide your program improvement. So the data is not just for federal reporting or state reporting, it's also can be used at the local level. And we really encourage you to try to make use of the Indicator 7 data to understand, what kind of impacts your programs are having on children, and how you can improve your programs based on those data. As you all are probably aware, Indicator 7 measures these 3 child outcomes that are shown here on the screen. So all states are required to report on these three outcomes. And so it has to do with the percentage of children with IEPs who demonstrate improvements in these 3 categories. So the first one is 7A is positive social emotional skills, and that has to do with social relationships. 7B is the acquisition and use of knowledge and skills. And then 7C is about use of appropriate behaviors. So I did want to note that it's important to understand that 7A is of particular importance in Massachusetts because DESE is supporting about 40 districts with implementation of pyramid model. And the pyramid model is an evidence-based framework for implementing effective practices for young children. And so DESE is supporting a number of districts with implementing the pyramid model. And the outcome that we're looking at for those districts is improvements in Indicator 7A. So that's one thing to note about the 3 indicators that are shown here. Okay, so next I wanted to highlight just a little bit, just touch on the child outcome summary process. And also known as the cost process, this is going to go beyond the scope of today's webinar. So I'm just going to touch briefly on it, but I really encourage all of you to check out the resources available through the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, because they have modules and just a number of resources that can really support your district, your team with this process. So just very briefly, the cost process summarizes information on a child's functioning in all of those 3 child outcome areas using a 7-point scale and a progress question. So it's important to note that this process should and the team should be consist of individuals who are familiar with the child, including the child's parents. We encourage you to use multiple sources of information about the child's functioning. So ideally, it really shouldn't just be a single teacher providing this rating. It should be a team of folks. There's important information that can come from parents, from childcare providers, could be direct assessments. So the cost process pulls together all these sources of data to come up with that rating and answer to the progress question. At exit, the team assesses whether the child exhibited any new skills and therefore made progress. And so it's important to know that the progress question is a yes/no question. And even if the child hasn't changed ratings or shown improvement on the rating scale, the progress question could still be yes. It's really about, did the child exhibit any new skills? So that's just one thing to know about the cost process. But again, I really encourage you to check out the ECTA website, Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, and all of the great resources around the cost process, including the really in-depth self-paced modules that they have. With that, I'm going to turn it over now to Talitha, who is going to provide information about the database. So the new database that we began using this year, we're very excited about, and Talitha has been instrumental in developing this database as well as providing support to all of you. So take it away, Talitha.
Great, thank you, Zach. And again, thank you all for being here. And I just wanted to say, had the privilege of speaking with many of you. I really appreciate the work that you're doing on this, because what we measure matters. So with that, I'm going to talk about my favorite thing, which is data, and my second favorite thing, or maybe new favorite thing, which is databases. So the Early Childhood Outcome Summary, or ECOS database. Next slide, please. So the Indicator 7 ECOS database is web-based. It's accessible via browsers on both PCs and Macs. We suggest Chrome or Microsoft Edge, and it's not as slow and error-prone as the smart forms that we used to use. Some specific benefits based on this in my individual conversations with many of you is that you don't have to try to find a PC to enter your data anymore. You can access and see your data in a more user-friendly format than the smart sheets over the course of the year. And you don't have to wait for the Excel smart form to ask you to 2 or 3 times to save it if you really don't want to save it, or it fails to save and you lose all the data you just entered. So DESE is investing in creating the ECOS because, as I said, it'll be more user-friendly. Using the system, the system will have data checks in it, so it'll help us capture more accurate and complete data. And that's designed to have districts to have an easier time knowing what to report and how to report it accurately. So moving beyond data entry, we will have a reporting feature that Zach will preview at the end. When this is released, it will allow the state and you folks at the district level to use the data for program improvement, which is a real big goal of all of ours. So the prior system allowed the state to report to OSEP, which is the federal mandate, as Zach explained, and to use it for state level program improvement. But now the reports for districts and also schools can be a tool that you can use to improve your own services in your schools for children with disabilities and their parents. For example, having these data at district and school levels, as well as the process of collecting the data, can be a tool to inform professional development locally and across the Commonwealth as far as progress monitoring and understanding. And I know we have a question in the chat about measurement, but this is a tool. So next slide, please. So I'm going to share a series of screenshots to walk you through accessing the system and entering data. So ECOS uses the same login as the ESE, Elementary and Secondary Education Security Portal. So you see the screenshot on the left. So it's a new application within the portal. So when you sign in, you see on the right, and I realize it's very small, but on the right, it says Special Education State Performance Plan as a link. You will also note that the Dropbox Central is still there, and Zach is going to talk about how to use that going forward later in our presentation. Sorry for the bells and whistles on my computer. All right, next slide, please. So after you select the Special Education State Performance Plan, you'll see the applications or sort of sub-applications within the performance plan that you have access to. I only have access to Indicator 7. Some of you may see more applications. So you would click this. In order to be able to access it, your district administrator must give you access to both Indicator 7 and the Special Education State Performance Plan. Next slide, please. So once you're in the ECOS application, you can select your school district by clicking on the drop down there, and you can you'll see your district's name, and then you basically give a stamp here. So right here, you select one, and then you click next. Here's where your district name is going to be. So hopefully that's pretty user friendly, and then at the bottom, you will notice that there are also links to help you as you're doing it real time with the information. Next slide, please. So this slide was in response to many people who are saying, you know, I'm new. Can you please tell me what information I need to enter? So here's kind of a list of the information you'll need to enter. And then I'm going to go through with some screenshots to show you the information and the potential errors that you might encounter. So entry data includes the date that the child started receiving preschool special education services. That may not always be the IEP date. It may be after the date when they actually started attending school or started receiving PT or OT or related services. So in the entry data, the entry date, and then you'll enter the cost ratings for all three outcomes that Zach described earlier. So the 1 through 7 rating. And in order to make sure that the ratings fully represent the rich data that you all collect by the evaluations and input from parents and the rest of the IEP team at the start of the services, the cost rating data should be collected within 4 to 6 weeks of first day of services. As you exit, you will be entering not you exit, but as the child exits, you will be needing to enter the exit date, the child that they stop receiving preschool special education services. Often that's the end of the school year. Sometimes it's not. This basically means, you know, for example, at the end of the school year, they're going to enter kindergarten. So they're still in your district, but they've exited preschool special education. Or, you know, if the child leaves the district or the state, that would be their date of exit. And at exit, you will enter the child's, sorry, I'm backing up, looking at my notes, but so exit exception, this is kind of a reverse coded thing. So exit exception means there's an exception for collecting data because we're all supposed to collect the exit data, but sometimes children and families move too quickly for that to be able to happen. So if that happens, you have an exit exception and you put yes, the student left the district without you being able to collect the exit cost ratings. And no means that you do have ratings to enter. So if the exit exception is no, that means you do have the ratings, then you will enter the 1 through 7 exit ratings for each of the progress questions, each of the outcome areas. And then you will also enter yes, no for the progress question for each of the 3 ratings. And I will be talking more about the progress questions when I share some screenshots later of common error messages. The other thing is if you have exit exception equals yes, you still need to enter the exit date. Next slide, please.
Before we move on, Talita, I just want to answer a couple of relevant questions. So right now for everyone, the database is in the midst of transitioning to the new school year. So again, as we had stated before in the emails, all data were due by August 31st. And once the data once the deadline has been passed, the IT team is now preparing the database for the new school year. So that's why no students, there's no update in the student enrollment, and districts cannot enter anything right now with in the ECOS database. Once the SIMS enrollment for the new school year have been transferred or loaded to the ECOS database, I will send it on email to everyone, letting them know that the ECOS database is now active and data can be submitted. And Daniel's question about the exit date, for students receiving ESY services, correct. The exit date would be the last day the student receives services before moving on to their kindergarten year. Thank you, Talita. Sorry about that.
No, that's very important. And we encourage you to answer questions. And thank you, Jean, for monitoring that. That's why we have a team to do these webinars. All right, so next slide, please. So the common errors, here's a list, and I will show you some screenshots. But so when you enter and save entry data for a child, the child will move from the first panel, which is part 1 entry data on your screen, to the second panel, which is part 2 exit data. And if you have a lot of students or a large school district, you'll have to scroll down. So once you enter and save the entry data, that child will transition into the exit data panel. All fields, I was mentioning earlier, must be entered or you will get an error. Pressing the save button, which I'll show in a minute, it will show the specific errors in red font by the children and the fields that need to be corrected. Next slide, please. So when you enter and save exit information for the child, they will still appear in that Part 2 exit data table. As with entry data, you must have complete data or you will complete exit data or you will get errors. So as I was mentioning earlier, if exit exception equals yes, that means you couldn't collect exit data. You must also enter the date of exit, which is the date they left the district, or an estimate of as close as when they left the district, but hopefully you have that information. And then if exit exception is no, meaning you do have the exit data, then you enter the 1 through 7 cost ratings for all 3 outcomes and the yes, no answer to the progress question for all 3 outcomes, as I mentioned before, but just, repeating it for those of you who are new. As with entry data, when you press the Save Exit Data button, it will show the specific errors for the fields for specific children. And one common error is for progress questions, which I'm going to be discussing in a bit on a screenshot. Next slide, please. So this screenshot shows the school level screen for related services. So children are organized by school. If they're receiving related services only and not in the preschool, that related services is considered a school. So all those children will be listed as the homeschooled special ed related services only school. And so this is the first part of the Part 1 data entry screen and the Save Entry Data button I was mentioning earlier. So all children certified by your district in SIMS as enrolled in preschool special education in your district and in this particular school will appear in the Part 1 table. And again, we're just showing the headers for. So the table has the SACID of the child, the first name, the last name, and the date of birth that are all loaded from SIMS. And then you will then enter the entry date and the entry ratings as I described on slide 12. Next slide, please. So this is the Part 2 section, which is the lower part of your screen, as I mentioned earlier. Also, just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that there are buttons all at the beginning, at the end. So if this was live, above the Save Entry Data at the top, you would see the entry data grid or table. But there's a save at the top and the bottom to help you, not have to scroll so much. So that's just one feature to note. And so when you say, as I mentioned earlier, when you save the entry data, then the child will be shifted to this grid, this table. And so when the student exits, you will enter the yes or the no for the exit exception and the exit date, regardless of what the answer is to the exit exception. If the exit exception is no, meaning you have cost data, then you will enter the 1 through 7 cost ratings and the yes, no progress questions for all 3 outcomes, as I described on slide 13. Next slide, please. So if there are errors, you will see the status at the top of the school page. You will also, on the district level page, you will see your list of schools, and there's an error column to indicate if there's errors. But when you go to the school page, you'll see this errors at the top. You may not see the actual errors that you need to correct. So that's why I was mentioning pressing the save buttons. When you press the save buttons in your session, then you'll be able to see the specific errors for the specific children. And now we'll show some of those specific errors. For the next slide, please. So this slide shows common missing entry data. If you enter an entry date, well, if you enter an entry date, you must also enter their ratings or you're going to get this error. It's okay to enter the entry date and wait on the ratings, which again should be done within 4 to 6 weeks of starting services. But until you add them, you will see this error for that school and that child on your district page. So if possible, don't want to see those red errors, then do it all at once you have the entry ratings from the teams, IEP teams. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the errors for missing data. As I was mentioning earlier, if any exit data are entered, such as no for the exit exception, then you must enter the exit date and the exit ratings and the progress questions, or you will get these errors. As I mentioned on the prior screen, with incomplete data entry, you will continue to see these error messages until you complete these fields. If you are trying to get ahead on your data entry, that's fine. Just be aware that you will see these errors. So if you don't like the error messages, then wait till you have all the data to enter. Next slide, please. So for children who exit the district without educators having the chance to collect the exit data, the answer to the exit exception is yes, but it still requires an exit date. So again, this is reinforcing what I've been saying earlier, is that you need an exit date regardless of the answer to the exit exception. Next slide, please. So earlier on slide 14, I mentioned that the progress errors question. So this slide actually shows those errors. So this is based on developmental trajectories, and more information is available on the ECTA website for that. But so basically what the child outcome summary or the cost measures is the child's level of functioning in relation to same age peers. So at age 3, if a child gets a rating of 5, the definition of rating of 5 means that the student shows functioning expected for his or her age some of the time or in some settings and situations. So when they're at age 3, then when they get older at age 5, to be able to get to the same rating of 5, which is, age expected functioning most of, or, in some situations or some of the time, they have to be able to do more, because 5-year-olds can do more than 3-year-olds. So in this particular scene, error screen, you see that there's a 5 at entry and a 5 at exit for outcome 1, but the exit progress question was no. This is impossible because to get as I just mentioned, to get a 5 at 3 and a 5 at 5, you have to be able to do more. So, if you go from a 3 to a 3, you have to be able to do more, etc. It's even possible for a child to go down in a numeric rating, but still have a yes for the progress question. If they even were able to do one new thing, then they've made progress. So the answer would be yes. Next slide, please. So this just shows the simple error of needing to complete the progress questions. Since the exit exception is no, that's why you see exit exception no means you have to enter the progress questions. Next slide, please. All right, so and finally, you're going to get an error if you enter a future exit date. For example, you have the ratings and it's the last week of school and you want to just get this done because you want to go on summer break. We understand that. If you put the date in the future before the date you're actually entering, the system will show it as an error. So one strategy is to just deal with the error and then, resave it on the end of the school year day. You have everything entered, and you resave it, and then the errors will clear, and then you can complete your submission. And here I wanted to draw your attention to the reset right here, that last column, the action. There's a link that says reset. And I wanted to show you this because this is one way to clear the data, and so you can re-enter it. So next slide, please. So when you press that link, you're going to get this. And I wanted to show this because quite personally, when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, am I going to delete the data? Like, this is actually okay. It won't delete the data. What it will do, if you're in the exit section, it will delete the exit data and it will move the child back up to part 1. So you'll see them in the entry section with their entry data still saved. And then you resave the entry data, and then they'll move back to the exit panel where you can correct the data entry. You can also correct all the entry data while they're there. You don't have to use the reset. There's different ways to do it. But again, if those error messages, using the reset kind of is helpful for eliminating the error messages that, you know, I don't like to see those either. So, all right, so just don't worry if you see this screen, the system is working properly. And the same thing is for, you'll get the same error. It'll be, are you sure you want to remove, it'll be entry data for the student. It'll just erase the entry data, and then you can start over with the entry data. So next slide, please. So here is success. This one and the next one show that your entry data are in a happy situation because they're all correct and there are no errors. And then on the next slide, you will see the success for the exit data. There, everything is correct. And then next slide, please. So the final step is really important. You've saved your data, but it's not submitted. So in order to submit it, it's very important that you look at the bottom of your screen and see that red, not finished, please review and certify below. And you'll see the checkbox. You check that to say that you're an authorized representative of the district and you're certifying the data. And then you need to also press the certify button right here. So 2 clicks. I'm authorized and I certify it. And once you hit certify, then you're done and everything is in. So let's see, next slide, please. So this is the you're done screen. It shows you at the bottom the date that it was certified and the credentials of the person who certified it. In this case, we have Marshmallow certifying our data for the Leprechaun School. All right, with that, hopefully people are laughing, maybe not. I know data can be dry, but I'll turn it back to Zach. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Talitha. We did have 1 or 2 questions come in. Talitha, if you want to stay on for just 1 second on camera to one question that I was hoping that you might speak to real quickly is if the district has not reported last year's data because the position was unfilled, I think like a data entry position, do we enter it as soon as we can?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been working with districts on an individual basis. If you have if the IEP team did the ratings and they're, for example, sitting in the child's file or in some kind of spreadsheet, and you have the ratings were done near the around the time that the child entered, please do enter them. We would appreciate that. If you don't have them and you would have to reconstruct what a rating would be, we don't recommend entering it just because of data quality. We want to be reporting high quality data because you know, it's what we use to gauge our progress. So hopefully that answers the question. You know, as soon as you can, you know, again, that because of the SIMS linkage, we have to wait for the 3 periods, and Zach is actually going to go over the schedule and suggested schedule for that later on in the presentation.
So thanks, Talitha. One additional question that I thought you might speak to now is, the question is, so with entering the exit date in the future, does that mean if we know a student's last day is at the end of ESY, we cannot enter the data at the end of the school year with the anticipated last day of 8/11/22, for example?
What I would recommend is you can enter it. You will just be seeing that error that the exit date cannot be in the future. So, you know, enter it and just, you know, kind of say, okay, there's going to be an error until the time comes when it's actually the day of the last day of school. at which point you go back into the system, you resave the exit data, you resave the entry data, you get those success screens, and then you can certify if you're done. But we recommend certifying as the final due date, because of the final SIM certification. The final due date is August 31st. So we recommend not certifying it until later in the summer, because you might get new information on students and new last minute enrollment that you would want to enter. So just wait to certify it until in August.
Great, thanks. And Jean, are there any other questions you want to address at this time?
Yeah, thank you, Zach. So all students with IEPs receiving either instructional services within a classroom, or if they're only receiving related services, need indicator 7 data. So that includes, students who are walk-in speech services or who only come to school or receive itinerant like OT, PT. Districts are required under IDEA to collect indicator 7 data. And so we've exit data. So regarding entry, when to collect entry and exit data, Talitha, are we taking data in all ages each year, or only the years they enter and exit?
Right, that's a really good question. So the entry data is a little bit easier. They can only, well, technically you can only enter and exit once, but you can also re-enter. But entry data, we want when the student starts, all children, whether they're 3, they're 4, or even 5, entry data when they start, or as soon as you're able to enter the data in the system after they start. And then because students can stay 1, 2, or 3 years, some students won't be exiting that year, so you'll just skip over them in the exit panel of the ECOS. It's fine to just leave everything blank for them, especially if you're knowing that the child is going to be exiting. So you want to enter the exit date, but you don't have any of the other information. In this case, I would not enter anything for that kid because it'll give you an error and you won't be able to certify the data for that prior year. So the exit data, only when the child exits is the most simple way to do it. So eventually, and Zach is going to be showing a phase-in schedule because we are moving off of the cohort system to show you kind of what districts can expect in the different cohorts. But basically, it's all children, any age at entry, age at or when they exit, but not before they exit. I hope that makes some sense.
Yes, thank you. And students who stay for fewer than 6 months, because the ECOS database will hold all students. So once you submit entry data for a student, the ECOS database will retain that student until you enter exit information. So we have worked with the IT team to reprogram the system so that even if they stay for even they receive services for fewer than 6 months, you don't need to collect exit data, but please do go ahead and put in the date of exit as well as exit exception, yes or no. It will typically be yes, that data were not collected prior to exit. So that this way, when the ECOS database updates the next round, the student will be removed from the system, and therefore you don't have this running list of all students who are waiting for exit data. And so there are a lot of questions. So the other thing I wanted to a little more about the ESY and why we want to collect data on ESY services, and it's because we do expect that children make progress during ESY. So I understand that different staff work in summer programs, and this is something that we would love your feedback on, whether it's in the survey that Zach will be providing, or just reaching out to us, letting us know what future supports and trainings you would like to see. We do want to provide more trainings on indicator 7 data collection, indicator 7 how to identify cost ratings, So just really let us know what your needs are, what the needs of your teachers are, so that we can provide the necessary support. And before it was very limited. Entry and exit data were only collected during the school year between September 1st and June 30th. However, because we have heard from a number of districts about wanting to collect the ESY data, and we recognize the importance of ESY in children's development, the entry date will always be the first date the services start. Then that could include the first date of ESY, and the exit date could also be the last day of ESY, because we do want to get an accurate understanding of each child's development. Okay, I'm going to throw these questions back to you, Talitha and Zach. Do you recommend using evaluation reports and a team discussion with parents at the initial meeting to obtain ratings, or should we wait to obtain ratings 4 to 6 weeks after enrollment?
I would recommend doing it when you do the initial evaluation. You have all the information there. You have the parents, the multiple sources of information, and ideally, as with all early intervention and preschool special education, parents are experts on their children, so you want their involvement. So the 4 to 6 weeks after is in situations where maybe you can't complete the full set of things you want to do to evaluate the child's level of functioning. They've already started school, for example, and you're still kind of figuring it out. I would recommend getting the cost ratings at the first IEP if possible. And then you have them in the file, and then when the system is ready to receive them, then you can enter them.
Thank you, Talitha. And again, entry and exit data are required for all preschool students with IEPs. So that includes those receiving related services only, and that also includes students who are English learners. And Zach is going to go through the new timeline process, because we are moving away from the cohort model and the cohort schedule. So it will be an annual data collection, and Zach will be talking about it right now. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So this section is going to cover the timeline and process for indicator 7. And we're going to share some suggested timelines and processes, and we'd like to hear, any suggestions from folks out there about how they are all making this work. So the first change that we wanted to show is that we're moving to annual reporting for all districts. So as Talitha just said and Jean has said, we're no longer using the cohort model. In the past, all districts were divided into cohorts, and the cohorts were responsible for collecting data on and following those children from entry to exit. We're moving away from that now. We're asking that data are collected on all children are entering preschool special education or exiting. So we know this means more data entry for districts, and so that will require some thinking, in terms of how this process can work efficiently for you. I think doing what Talitha just said, of kind of embedding it within the IEP process, really makes a lot of sense for that entry data. But we're hoping also that this increased data collection will enable more frequent data use for you all in terms of really being able to examine how children are performing in your districts. The second change, as we've kind of already talked about, is that now we're using the ECOS database. So we no longer want you to use the smart forms and Dropbox, which was the previous system. We've talked a bit about this. Jean mentioned that all students designated as receiving early childhood special education will appear in the ECOS database following SIMS certification. And there's a SIMS certification window and a recertification process that happens. And so once that happens, then those students who are designated as receiving early childhood special education will be transferred into the ECOS database. And so that's why you'll see all children who receive services listed there. So as Talitha has shown, ECOS has these built-in edit checks that will prevent common errors and promote data completeness. So we're excited about that. And just finally on this change to ECOS, I wanted to highlight that if you do need to communicate with DESE or with Talitha or me about an individual child, please don't send a SACID or a student's name or a student's birthday by email. You can use the Dropbox still to communicate that kind of personal information about a student, but please don't send it by email because that's not a secure way of communicating with us. Okay, so this slide shows that suggested timeline that Talitha and Jean were both talking about. So there are 3 SIMS certification windows. There's one in the fall, one in the spring, and one in summer. So we're suggesting that after the fall SIMS recertification, you add entry data for new students, you update exit data for any student who has exited, and you should plan on this happening around mid to late November, because that will give time for the tech team, the IT team, to transfer the data from SIMS into ECOS database. Jean or someone from DESE will be sending out an email notifying you of when the data is ready for you, when the database is ready to be updated. So we suggest, again, that mid to late November for the fall data entry. In spring, again, you're going to add entry data for new students, update exit data for any students who exited, and then plan to do this around mid to late April, but you'll be notified from DESE about when it's ready. And then in summer, again, add entry data for new students, update exit data for any students who exited. In summer, you're also going to certify the indicator 7 data to complete the submission. And you can plan to enter data beginning around August 1st. It'll be due by August 31st each year. Okay, so this slide and the next few slides show kind of this phase-in process that we're talking about. So, you know, although we're no longer on a cohort model, it's important to think about your cohort to understand that there are some students who you've already collected entry data on that are in the system. And so you need to remember that those students still do require exit data. So for cohorts 1 and 2, this is the reporting schedule that is shown here. When it says in the first column under 22-23 school year, so we see that for districts that were in cohort 1 or cohort 2, they have no exit data to report on students who entered in the 2020-21 school year. They should have no exit data for students who entered in 21-22 school year. But they are going to report entry and exit data for students who began in this current school year, 22-23. So it's important to say that the main idea here is that you're going to report exit data for any student for whom entry data was previously collected. And then you're going to report entry and exit data for any new students who are beginning, starting this school year. So I'll give you a second just to kind of look at this slide and think about kind of your own process and what this means. I'll also note that even if you weren't required to collect that entry data, if you did collect it and you have entry data for those students, you can certainly, we would appreciate you submitting exit data for the students. And one implication of this is that you're going to see students in your entry panel that you can actually skip over because you didn't collect entry data for them previously. So you're just going to skip over those students if you don't have any entry data. So those students who entered in previous years who you didn't collect entry data on, you can skip those.
And Zach, if I may, Christine had a question that I thought, Jean, I thought it was relevant to this. So maybe Jean, you had said you wanted to answer it. Maybe you could go ahead and answer it, or I can.
Okay, yeah, so I saw a number of questions that are pretty similar. So for students who move from, for example, District 1 to District 2, all districts who receive new students, whether they transfer from another district or they're starting services for the first time, should go ahead and collect that entry data. And then again, collect the exit data prior to students exiting. On our end, Zach and Talitha, when they compile the data, they're going to clean the comprehensive data set so that each student has only one entry data and one exit data. And so districts only need to collect entry data when students first start their program, and they only need to collect exit data for when they exit. So if you have students returning from previous years with an IEP and you already have entry data, you do not need to collect entry data again.
Anything that you want to add, Talitha?
Yeah, and I know there was a question about, so in some situations, children start and they have all their entry information, their evaluations, the IEP, and then they move fairly quickly to another district. And from what I've been hearing, you know, it makes sense to use those evaluations and the information. It's already been done, so you're just going to implement it in the new district. So hopefully you will be able to get the entry ratings from the prior district. I know we're working on trying to figure out how electronically to port those entry ratings across districts. It's not quite there yet, but I guess the good practice, best practice, whenever you're transferring a student, the information on their entry evaluation and IP and all of that should be transferred to the new district so they can use it. And I also wanted to, there was a question about confidentiality and privacy. Jean, did you want to answer that? There's kind of a perception that this is a third-party software company. And so, you know, questions about forms or privacy.
So this is definitely not a third party. This is our IT team who developed this database, as well as making enhancements and creating reports are within DESE. They are part of the Executive Office of Education. So all of this is in-house, and it's so that can be aligned with SEM. So there are no external parties involved in the data collection other than DESE, our evaluators, Zach and Talitha, and the districts. And a number of you asked about the forms regarding the ratings. Everything is available on ECTA, and I did drop the link in chat.
And there's one more question about itinerant services. So basically the simplest rule is any type of services that are provided under 619 IEP, we would like entry and exit data for those children because they're technically being served under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act 619 section of Part B.
Correct. And a few other questions I wanted to address. So as you all know, this last school year was our first time using the ECOS database. The purpose was to make it easier, more user-friendly for y'all to enter your data. And so we hope that, you know, it has been much more pleasant than submitting the smart forms. And we really do appreciate all of you in helping us pilot the database. We are in ongoing conversations with our IT team, meeting twice a week to look at future enhancements. So we have a number of enhancements on our to-do list, including District 2 being able to access District 1's entry data via the ECOS database. So again, you know, we appreciate you working with us on making this transition, and we're just going to continue to ask for patience while we make upgrades to the database. But we do expect that the database will be much easier for districts to collect and analyze data. And Zach and Talitha are going to go over in a little bit what the reports that districts will be able to download from the ECOS database. So So again, if you get a transfer student, please collect the entry data within 4 to 6 weeks, and Talitha and Zach will clean up the data on their end. And again, entry date should be the first date of service, not the date of the IEP meeting. But you can collect ratings during the IEP meeting, as long as the ratings are still accurate and reflective of the child's development by their first day of service. The 7-point rating scale, again, that's provided by ECTA, who is our technical assistance provider for indicator 7. It is a national 7-point rating scale. And again, if this is something that you would like more support on, definitely put it in the feedback in the survey feedback, so that we can figure out how to best support you in your indicator 7 work. All right, thanks, Zach and Talitha.
Good. Okay, well, thanks all for those questions and answers, and then just move us along. Again, here's another sort of snapshot of what the former cohort 3 reporting schedule would be over these next 3 years. Cohort 3 actually collected data on students last year, collected entry data on students this past school year. So it's important to remember that you will need to report exit data for those students this school year, for any students who exit, as well as entry and exit data for the new cohort of students who are entering. Also worth noting that, over the next year or two, there will still be students that you'll need to skip in the entry panel, but that will all be cleared out by I believe the 24-25 school year for most districts. So in the 24-25 school year, you'll no longer need to skip students because you didn't collect entry data on them because of the cohort model. By that school year, you'll just be, all students in the database will have entry data, and you'll be providing exit ratings for all the students as well. And here's the same slide for the cohort 4. So again, reporting exit data for the 2020-21 student cohort, the students who entered in that school year, who are cycling through the process. There would be no exit data for the 21-22 student cohort, and then you would report entry and exit data for this new cohort that's starting this year. So again, the big message here is you're going to report exit data on any student for whom entry data was previously collected. You're going to skip students who you didn't collect entry data on because you were off cohort or you weren't following those students. And you're going to, starting this year, collect entry and exit data for all students who enter preschool special education. Okay, so in terms of data collection process suggestions, we shared that we encourage you to set up collection deadlines around the SIMS schedule. So I think that's going to be the best way to kind of develop a process for entering this data into the system, is to use those 3 SIMS certification windows as your timelines for when you're going to update data within the system. You're going to have to think, as you're required to submit entry and exit data for more students, what kind of supports do educators or other staff need to scale this process to all students who are receiving special education services. And then, if there are really successful ways of doing this data collection that are really working well for you, we'd love to hear about it. You can share that, through survey feedback. I know this isn't the best kind of format for sharing with others, but it does look like someone raised their hand. So Jean, would you be able to call on that person?
I think it was Sandra Hubbard. Oh, am I still on mute? Sandra Hubbard? I don't know. You may need to just go ahead and put your question in the Q&A.
It does look like Sandra's there now, so.
Okay.
I just unmuted her.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't raise my hand. I'm not quite sure.
Apologies. If anyone wants to raise a hand, we can try that again. If you have something to share about kind of the process for doing this, or a question around the process, we'd love to hear from you all at this point.
So just really quickly, while people are thinking about their questions, I answered a question about forms, a spreadsheet. You might want to just make a secure spreadsheet that's only accessible by people who are authorized. So again, protecting our students' privacy, but just model it after essentially what the old smart form or the table structure in the ECO. So, you would have the SASA, the date of birth, the student's name, their entry date, their entry ratings, their exit exception, their exit date, their exit ratings, and their progress questions. And you can have that. So if you would like to collect that, so it's all in one space before it's ready to be entered in ECOS, that would be the way I would do it.
Great, thanks.
So
All right,
yes,
so
Zach, quick question for you. Question. So is everyone collecting entry data this school year, 2022 to 2023?
Right, you would collect entry data on all students that are entering preschool special education this school year. Also, all districts would be responsible for that this year.
Thank you. And so for smaller districts, all districts regardless of size are required to submit indicator 7 data. You may not see it in our on our webpage because the sample size, if it falls below a certain number of students being reported, the data will be suppressed. However, we do report all data from all districts to the federal government every year.
Right, in aggregated format, not identifiable. Jill Pietro had a question or hand raised, I think. I'm going to unmute you, Jill.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks. So it's not so much of a question as you asked about if anybody was willing to share their process.
Yes.
That being said, we are a very small district. We only have about 47 preschoolers and about 20 special ed students. So super small compared to probably many of the others in this webinar right now. However, what we have found most helpful is doing these these ratings together as a SPED team during our PLCs. So we utilize our time, I guess, as best we can. I advocate as the early childhood coordinator to my SPED director, look, I need my SPED team during the PLC this month, at obviously, like you guys suggested, around those SIMS dates to go over this, this data collection process. And it has worked so far for us.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's a great suggestion, using those PLCs when you're coming together as a team. Anyway, it makes a lot of sense. Anyone else want to share before we move on? All right, so I will just briefly, I'm going to highlight a couple screenshots. One of the features that Talitha mentioned briefly is that there are going to be reports that are available within the database. So we're excited about that. These aren't available yet, but they're coming soon. We think by, I'll let Jean say when the date is when these are going to be available, but they are in development and coming soon. And so the really nice thing about the reports is that you can see a side-by-side comparison of state, district, and school. So you can kind of drill down to the school level and see the number and percentage of students in each of the 5 categories. So there are the indicator 7 data are aggregated into these progress categories. They're called OSEP progress categories. And you can see them listed here. The first one is children who did not improve functioning, children who improve functioning but not sufficient to move nearer to functioning comparable to same age peers, children who improve functioning to a level nearer same age peers but did not reach it, children who improve functioning to reach a level comparable to same age peers, and children who maintain functioning at a level comparable to same age peers. So those are the 5 progress categories. So the system will take the data and kind of output it in this format. So there are a variety of reports, ways of looking at the data, but the sort of exciting thing about it is being able to kind of look at how your district or your school, kind of the trends in the numbers compared to state or district. So we are excited about that feature that's coming soon. This is another example report showing the 5 progress categories, the percentage of students in each category from the state level, the district level, and the school level. This will give you a kind of a big picture snapshot of how your school or district is comparing to the overall state. And Talitha or Jean, is there anything you wanted to share about the reports that I didn't touch on?
No, I think, again, this is like our first step towards empowering the districts with information and data on so that they can better decide how y'all can use the data and areas that you may need additional or would like to see additional support or training. We are in talks with developers again with about enhancements. Ultimately, we do want to be able to allow districts to disaggregate the data by subgroups so you can do more in-depth analyses of child outcomes. And if you, again, have any ideas or anything in particular that you want to see come from the reports, definitely let us know and we can relay the information to our developers.
And I would just mention in the survey for this webinar, we're asking people if they would like, what they would like for future webinars. Using data will be very important. We're creating the platform for not just the state, but districts and schools to be able now to use the data. With that comes some responsibility and an important privacy and good data stewardship tenets that many of you might not know. So that would be something we could do in the future if you're interested. So with that said, I'm actually going to put the survey link for this webinar into the chat. But I think we've kind of already gone into questions and answers, but Zach, did you want to say anything?
Well, if there are more questions and answers, we have time to stay on and continue to answer those. But I did want to just highlight some of the resources for the cost process that we talked about. I believe Talitha has shared the ECTA Center link. There is an online module that it really goes in depth into the cost process, and it's a self-paced module with videos. So we really encourage folks to check that out for an in-depth, tutorial on the whole process. There's also definitions for the cost ratings. That's an important resource to have when you're doing these with your teams. There's a decision tree on there, which is a resource to help you in the cost process to come to decisions about the ratings. There's also practice scenarios and a quick reference guide that just provide more information. So those are just a few of the resources available, but we do encourage you to check those out and share those with folks in your district who would benefit.
So we have a few more questions I would like to answer right now. So again, in an earlier slide, and I've been stopping the PowerPoint in chat. So let me know if you need us to drop it again. So the data will be loaded to ECO's database after each SEMS recertification deadline. So I'm going to tell you what what their expectation is with transferring the data from SEMS to ECOS. They initially, last year we waited, last year they did not want to transfer the SEMS data until all districts had certified their data. So towards the end, we were just waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks for one district to certify their SEMS data. This time around, so as we've worked with the IT on that, and we've come up with a new calculation. They will load the first round of SEMS data into ECOS database once 75% of districts have certified their data. That will be the first round, and then the remaining round will be the remaining 25%. So, please encourage your district, whoever's in charge of loading or certifying the SEMS data, please encourage them to submit their data or certify their data by the recertification deadline, so that you can be a part of the first round of districts that will be able to access the ECOS database. And we are hoping, we are slowly revamping our webpage, our SEP webpage. They are wanting to do a complete reorganization, taking down outdated resources and creating and uploading new ones. So please, be patient, and we do hope to update the webpage, SEP webpage, to include all the changes, as well as any of the new resources or guidance to support your work. And again, for those who, ideally, if you have a student transferring from district 1 to your district and you're able to access those entry ratings, by all means, please use them and include them in your data in your database submission. If you are not able to access previous entry data, then we do ask that you collect new entry data so that there is a baseline from which you can work. I think we've covered everything in Q&A. Any final questions from anyone? We hope this has been helpful. We do plan on providing more webinars and trainings, but we really would like your feedback on what you would like to see from us and how we can best support your work with Indicator 7.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time and attention today, and your willingness to really support this work. We really appreciate it. Thank you again. We'll stay on the line for a few minutes, but if there are any lingering questions, otherwise, please do complete the survey.